We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Vavam and Bezim Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 36b. We said on the previous summit that if you have a woman who's a bogeres, so there's no tainus basula, meaning over there the person can't say, well, I found that she wasn't a basula, because we assume since she's of age, she's a bogeres, so her body changes, and maybe those signs are not there. And the Gemara says, what do you mean the signs are not there? But we said earlier that we do presume that there's the blood, the dam basulim, even by a bogeres. There is a sign of virginity in terms of that. So therefore, he does have a claim. He could say he saw no blood, and he could claim, therefore, she's not a basula. Why do we say, ein la tainus basulim? And so the Gemara answers, Ida katoyin tainas damim hachinami. You're right. If he would have claimed a claim of blood, meaning if the person comes along and says, I found that she was not bleeding at all, that actually would be a good claim, and therefore he could use that claim to make her lose her ksuba. But hacha b'mayaskin, and here, what are we talking about in this brisa? The katoyin tainas pesach basuach. He's coming and claiming that the doorway was open, so to speak, and in that situation, by a bogeres, we assume that it might be open even if she is a basula, and therefore that is not going to be a good claim. Rashi over here says, "Ida katoyin tainas dam hachinam yihach mayaskin and the katoyin tainas pesach basuch. Ida kamer baalti v'lo matzasi dam." If he says I had relations with her and there was no blood, v'adei tainam al yosi, that would be a good claim. V'hacha de katani ein la tainas basulim. Here, where we say that there is no tainas basulim, de katoyin v'yomer pesach basuach matzasi. He's claiming that the doorway was open. V'dam lo bedakti im nimsa b'im lav. I didn't check to see if there was blood or not. So benaru katana taini. By a nar and a katana, that actually is a good claim. Kedamrin ben perakama v'yavav yishen yachol levar devarav b'fonenu. Even though he can't prove what he's saying to us, Amrinan, we say chazak ein adam torech b'suda mafsida. A person's not going to go to all the trouble of making a wedding and then make himself lose out on the whole thing with a bad claim. Avol misha bagra, however, once she becomes a bogeres, ein rach motzar, her womb is no longer narrow, kibatchila like it was earlier, v'dom elo kilu pesach basuach. He thought it was pesach basuach, but it really was not. And the Gemara continues, we said on the previous Amud, Sumchis Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir, Summa, Ein La Tainus Basulim. Sumchis said in the name of Rabbi Meir that when it comes to a blind woman, there's no Tainus Basulim. He can't claim that he did not find the signs of virginity, because it's possible that she lost them in another way without having relations. And the Gemara says, "My time at the sumchus." Well, what's the reason of sumchus? Why do we assume by a blind girl that she may have lost her basulim in some other fashion? Amar Vizera says, very simple, because she falls on the ground, that can cause her to lose her basulim. The Gemara says, "Kulunami chavute mechavti," but all girls, all children might fall on the ground and lose their basulim. What's unique about a woman who's blind? And the Gemara says, no, kulu ro'os umaros liman, all other girls, so they're going to see what happened to them, and they're going to show their mother, and it's going to be clear, we're going to realize that they have no basulim. But zu eino ro'a ve'eino mar l'ima, by a blind girl, she doesn't see what's happening, she doesn't show it to her mother, and therefore it could be that it happened and we were unaware, and that's why there's no tainus basulim by a summa. And the Gemara continues, "Vayotzes mishum shem ra ein lo knas v'lo pitoy." It said, let's say you have a woman who had to be separated from her husband because of the fact that right now we think it means she actually cheated on her husband. That's what it means, mishum shem ra. So therefore, such a situation, she does not receive the knas payment, she does not receive the pitoy payment. And the Gemara says, Hayotzis mishum shemra. What are you talking about? If you have a situation where she had to be divorced from her husband because she committed adultery, baskilahi, she's going to get skila in that case. Of course she's not going to receive the payment. What are we even talking about over here? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Hachi Kamar, here's what it really means to say. Misha yatsa aleh shemra bialdusa. Let's say you have a girl who she had a bad reputation when she was a child. We assume that she was active with other men. She had relations with other men. So in such a situation, she's not a basula. Or we can presume she's not a basula. So ein la lo knas v'lo pitoy. She doesn't get those payments of knas and pitoy because of the fact that it's presumed that she is no longer a basula. And the Gemara continues, Amar Papa says, Shma mino, you see from this halacha, Haishtara reya lo magvinan bei. Let's say you have a shtar, and the shtar also has a bad reputation, similar to this case of the girl. You wouldn't be allowed to use that shtar. In other words, Papa is comparing a girl with a bad reputation to a shtar with a bad reputation. And the Gemara says, hey, Chidami, well, what exactly is the case? What kind of comparison is Rav Papa making? If you're going to say that Rav Papa means to say any shtar where you have a rumor that it was a forged document, you can't use it. The Chavasa, you're going to say the same thing over here. The Nafak Allah Kala Dezanoi, just because a rumor happened about a girl, suddenly you're going to assume that it might be true. But Rava said, if a woman or a girl has a bad reputation in the city that she's with other men, we don't concern ourselves with rumors. Rumors are not enough to ruin a girl's status, and so therefore that cannot be what Rav Papa is saying. So Ella da'asu beitrei va'amri lididhu tavatinhi be'isura. Rather, what you're going to say is as follows. What happened was 2 people came and they said she came to us and she asked to have relations with us. And it can't be a situation where we know for sure. It can't be 2 witnesses are testifying that she had relations, because then it's obvious. Then there's edus that she's not a basula. But the case is, let's say 2 men come and say that she came to us wanting to have relations with us, and that is enough to assume that she's somebody who probably had relations with others. And you'll say the same thing over here by a star. Diasu beitrei. Let's say 2 people come along, ve'amri, and they say, "Lididhu amarlu zaifuli." This guy told us to forge a document. So now we can assume that this document over here, even though we didn't forge it, we can assume that he found someone to forge it. So that's going to be the comparison that Rav Papa is making. But the Gemara doesn't like the comparison. B'shalom hasan, because it makes sense over there by a case of a woman who goes to 2 men and she tries to get them to have relations with her. So there, shchichi prutza, there's many people available who are prutzin who will have relations with her. We can assume if she went to them, she went to others, and certainly she found others who agreed. Elohacha, but over here by the document, just because this guy is presumed that he's going around trying to find people to forge it. Kol Yisrael mi huchsaku is all of Klal Yisrael. He was able to find someone to forge a document. That we're going to assume such a thing. The Gemara says, Hachanami, no, here also. Kevan to Kamahadra Ziyufa, since he's looking for someone to help him forge a document, Amor Ziyufe Zayafikasav. We can assume that maybe he himself went ahead and forged it. In other words, once he's looking for it, so maybe he went ahead, he couldn't find anybody, and he did it, so we do presume that there's a problem with this document. Rashi says, Amor Ziyufe Zayaf, Hu Atzmo Laman L'chavin Ksav Adome, L'chsav Yedeidim Shechasim Bo. He taught himself how to forge the signatures of these Eidim, and therefore, just like the case of the girl, here also we assume that the document is not good. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ve'elu she'ein lahen kanas. In the following cases, there is no kanas payment. Haba al hagioris, ve'al hashvuya, ve'al hashifcha. Let's say a person has relations. Let's say a person rapes a gioris, a convert, or a shvuya, a captive, or a shifcha, a maidservant. Shenivdu v'shenesgairu v'sheneshta'achraru, yiseirus al benos shalosh shana v'yom echad. But they were redeemed, or they converted, or they were freed, but they were older than 3 years old in a day at that time. So it's assumed, therefore, that while they were gioris, shvuya, shifcha, they probably had relations, and again they were older than 3 years old, and therefore it's assumed at this point in time that they're no longer considered besulas, and that's why there is no knas payment. Rashi says, Yiseres albanos shalosh shanim, they're older than 3 years old, they came into ru'uyos labia, since they're now at the age where they're fit to have relations, bechezkas hefker hein, they have a presumption that they were like hefker, they're like ownerless, so to speak, v'nevolos benachruyusan v'ashvuy b'shavyusa, and they had relations either while they were not Jewish or while they were in captivity, and so in that case again, in these cases again, they will not receive the knas. And the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shavuya sheniftas hareu b'ktushasa. If you have a captive and she's redeemed, no, she still remains in her holiness. We do not assume that she had relations, afal pisha gedola, even though she is an adult. Haba al bito, al bas beno. Let's say a person has relations with his daughter, or with the daughter of his daughter, or with the daughter of his son. Al bas ishto, or the daughter of his wife. Al bas beno, the daughter of her son. Al bas bito, or the daughter of her daughter. Ein lohen kanas. In all of these cases, there is no kanas payment. Mipnei shemeschaya benafsha, because this act of relations is enough to make this person chayev misa in Bezdin. Shemisason bidei Bezdin, the misa is given by the courts. And any time a person is chayev misa, they don't also pay money. Shenemar, like it says, you only make the payment if the woman did not die. But again, if she did die and therefore there's a death penalty involved, there is no monetary payment, as Rashi says. If there is ason, if the woman did die, again, it's talking about the 2 people who are fighting and then they end up hitting a pregnant woman, and if that woman did die, lo yayanish, again, as we've said earlier, there is no monetary payment when there is a chiyuv misa. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Dosa amru davar echad. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa, they say the same idea. They say when it comes to a woman who's taken captive, she is b'kedusha, so we assume that she was not violated. Rabbi Yehuda hadam, and Rabbi Yehuda is what we just said in the Mishnah. That's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda said. Rabbi Yehuda said over here, Shavuya sheniftas harehi b'kedusha sa'afa pisha gedola. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Dosa, and where do we see this in Rabbi Dosa's opinion? The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Shavuya ochelas b'truma. Shavuya is allowed to eat truma. As Rashi here says, Shvuya bas Kohen, we're talking about the daughter of a Kohen, so she eats on account of her father. Ocheles b'truma v'lo mechazkinan la b'chezkas be'ula livso la hamechal b'biyasa. We don't assume that she had relations while she was held captive, and therefore she's considered to be a chalala and not allowed to have truma. We don't say that. We say she's allowed to have truma because we presume she was not violated. Again, Shvuya ocheles b'truma divrei Rabbi Dosa. That's Rabbi Dosa's opinion. And the Brisa continues. Amar Rabbi Dosa says, "V'chi ma'asa's law and Ravi halaz. What did this Arab do to her already? V'chi mibnei shemiyach la bein vadeh pasla min akuna. Just because he's feeling between her breasts, that's going to disqualify her from the kuna. In other words, we don't assume that they had actual relations, and therefore she is not disqualified." As Rashi over here says, when a person takes a woman captive, they're not going to have relations. And they play with the girl, but they don't do things which really disqualify her. That's Rabbi Dosa's view. And again, that's the same as Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. Rashi over here continues, Rabbanan pligiad Rabbi Dosa. The Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Dosa. V'yamru yesh shavuya ocheles, v'yesh ein ocheles. They say, no, it depends. Some captives are allowed to have truma, some can't. Keitzad ha'isha shamar nishbeisiu torani. For example, if the woman says, I was captured, but I'm pure, so we only know that she was captured based on her word, ocheles, then she could eat truma. V'im yesh eidim shenishbes, but if there are eidim that say she was captured, v'yomeres torah, and she claims she was pure, eina ocheles b'Mesechet Edyos, there, she is not allowed to eat truma. In other words, they say she is not believed in such a situation, she is disqualified if we know that she was held captive. In any case, the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba says, Dil Maloi, maybe it's not true. How do you know that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa really agree with each other? Adkan lo Amar Rabbi Yehuda hacha, maybe Rabbi Yehuda only says it over here, Ela shelo yehei chote niskar, because he doesn't want the sinner, this person raped this girl, he doesn't want that guy to profit. Now this guy's not going to have to pay the fine because she was once held captive. No, Rabbi Yehuda says he should pay the fine. Avol Hasam, but maybe over there in terms of whether she can eat truma, maybe he holds like the Rabbanan, and he says, no, she shouldn't eat truma, she may have been violated. Inami, or you can go the other way. Adkan lo kama Rabbi Dosa, samela b'truma derabbanan. Maybe Rabbi Dosa was only lenient when he was talking about truma that was just derabbanan. Rashi says, ela b'truma bizman hazed derabbanan. Truma nowadays is derabbanan. So there, the kavan, as Rashi says, the kavan da'afilu nivala isur derabbanan bi'almahu. Even if she did have relations, it's only an isur derabbanan involved, so Rabbi Dosa is going to be lenient. Avol kanas do raisa karabonin svirle, but maybe by a kanas, which is something on a do raisa level, as Rashi says, avol kanas dafuke memono, you're taking money from this person on a do raisa. Emalach safik buul, he will say, no, there's a doubt over here. Maybe she was violated. Umisveika lomafkin memona. When you have a doubt, you're not going to take out money. Avol kanas do raisa karabonin svirle. Again, maybe Rabbi Dosa would agree with the Rabbanan when it comes to kanas that is a do raisa. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya. Abaya said back to him, talking about back to Rabba, V'taimei de Rabbi Yehuda hacha shelo yehechote niskar, is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda, is his reason really shelo yehechote niskar? The only reason that he says that the person doesn't pay the fine is because we don't want this sinner to profit over here, but really she was violated? That's not true. V'tanya, but we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shavuya shenishbis, if you have a situation of a captive, harehi bikdusha, so we assume she is still holy, meaning we assume she's not violated. Afilu baseser shanim ksubasa masayim, even 10 years, still she receives the ksuba of 200. Meaning over here, v'hasam ma'ishalo yechote niskarika. Here, where is the chote niskar? Here, we're actually giving her. We're presuming she's a basula. We're giving her the full ksuba of 200, and there was no sin that was committed. So clearly, Rabbi Yehuda holds that really we are actually assuming she was not violated. Again, ma'ishalo yechote niskar ika hasam. In that case, ika, what shalo yechote niskar is over there? We're just saying she's entitled to the full ksuba. And the Gemara says, no, hasam nami, there is an independent reason why we'd want to give her a ksuba of 200, dilma mimni velo nasvila, because otherwise we're afraid maybe people will refrain from marrying her. If we had her get a lower ksuba, people would say, oh, she's not a basula, and they won't want to marry her. Therefore, to encourage people to marry her, we give her the ksuba masayim. So in other words, when there is a reason to presume, if there's some outside reason to presume she wasn't violated, maybe then Rabbi Yehuda says that, but in general, it is possible she was violated. And the Gemara continues 1 second, V'savar Rabbi Yehuda b'ktushasa kaima. But does Rabbi Yehuda really even say this? That we assume that she's still holy, we assume she wasn't violated? V'atanya, but we learned in a brayso as follows. Hapodes hashvuya, let's say a person redeems a girl who's a captive, Yisa'ena, he is allowed to marry her, even though he's the one that redeemed her. Maybe you would think that he really wants to marry her over here, and that's why he's redeeming her. No, the one who redeems her is in fact allowed to marry her. But Meidba, but if he's the one that testifies about her and says says that she was not violated, so then lo yisa'en, and then he's not allowed to marry her again. Maybe he's just saying that because the situation is he wants to marry her. Rashi over here says, Meid ba kasal kadaitin da'apo dekoi. Right now we think we're talking about the one who redeemed her also testifies. Shem haya meid ba shelo nivel, if he's the one that testified, she didn't have relations, lo ovid kochavim lo yisa'en, he's not allowed to marry im kohen. We're talking about a situation where he's a kohen is not allowed to marry this woman who is violated. So again, the Tanna Kama is saying if he testifies about her, he can't marry her. Rabbi Yehuda says, again, we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda here in the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda says, Bein kach, in all situations, lo yisa'ena. He cannot marry her. Sounds like Rabbi Yehuda is strict and assumes she was violated. And the Gemara now says, Hagufa kasha. Well, one second, this price itself is difficult. Amrit hapodes hashvuya yisa'ena. First you said if he redeems her, he's allowed to marry her. V'hadartan, and then it said, Meid ba lo yisa'ena. If he testifies about her, he can't marry her. Mishum de meid ba lo yisa'ena. Just because he testified, therefore he's not allowed to marry her. Rashi over here says, Mishum demeid ba v'ha'amru hapodes hashvuya yisa'ena. You just said if he redeemed her, he could marry her. Now suddenly he can't just because he testified. And the Gemara says, no, halo kash, it's not difficult. Here's how you read, you understand this brisa. Hapodes hashvuya umeid ba yisa'ena. If he redeems her and he testifies about her, he can marry her. As Rashi says, Di lav de kimle begava lo shadi zuzi bechti. If not for the fact that he was certain she was not violated, he wouldn't have spent his money to redeem her. Shareli sana pada, he's doing it in order to marry her. We assume that person is certain. So in such a situation, yisa'ena, he could marry her. But meid ba kedi, but if all he does is testify about her, so then lo yisa'ena, then he shouldn't marry her. Rashi says, Meid ba kedi lo yisa'ena shema'in of nasan, but again, maybe he's just testifying because he wants to marry her, but if he didn't spend any money, we really have no reason to believe him. That's how you understand the brisa. If he redeems her and testifies, it's okay, but if all he does is testify, it's going to be a problem. In any case, though, the Gemara says, Mikol Makom Kashal Rabbi Yehuda. Nevertheless, this brisa is difficult with Rabbi Yehuda. Again, Rabbi Yehuda said by us that we can assume she was not violated. And here he says, Lo Yisa'ena, we assume she is violated. So what's going on? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa says, Ema Rabbi Yehuda Omer Bein Kachu Vein Kach Yisa'ena. The way you should actually read the brisa is on the contrary. Rabbi Yehuda says in all situations he is allowed to marry her, consistent with Rabbi Yehuda's position, again, that we assume she was not violated. And the Gemara continues, Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua, Omer Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, he answers the brisa as follows, Liolam Kidikatani, really just have the same text that we have, that Bein Kachu Vein Kach, he should not marry her, but Rav Yehuda Ledivreim de Rabbanan Kamer Lahu. Rabbi Yehuda was just responding according to the view of the Rabbanan, wasn't saying his own view. Lidi, according to me, Bein Kachu Vein Kach Yisa, and in all situations he can marry her, we assume she wasn't violated. But according to you, Bein Kachu Vein Kach Lo Yisa, and why are you making distinctions in all cases? In all cases, you should assume she was violated and say he can't marry her. Why are you making a distinction between redeeming her and not redeeming her? So Bein Kachu Vein Kach Lo Yisa mi boile, you should have made no distinctions, and you should have always forbid him to marry her. And the Rabbanan, why do they make a distinction? The Rabbanan will respond, like Rashi already said, Hapodes hashvuyu umeid bo yisa, and if he redeems her and he testifies, he can marry her. Lo shadi inish zuzi bechti, a person's not going to throw away his money for nothing. But meid bo kedi, but if all he does is testify, lo yisa, he should not marry her, shema ein of nasan ba, because maybe he turned his attention towards her, maybe he's just testifying because he really wanted to marry her. And the Gemara continues, Rami lei Rav Papa bar Shmuel Rav Yosef. Rav Papa bar Shmuel had the following contradiction to Rav Yosef, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph.